The HOA president stood there, smug as a peacock, watching the police walk toward my vineyard while I calmly sipped my morning coffee. She had no idea she'd just made the biggest mistake of her miserable little life. Picture this. Dawn breaking over Solstice Valley, morning mist rolling through my grapevines like nature's own curtain call. I'm out there at 5 a.m., pruning shears in hand, when I hear the distant wail of sirens cutting through the peaceful morning air. The crunch of boots on fallen grape leaves gets louder as two officers approach, their radios crackling with static. And there's Delilah Hartwell, HOA president extraordinaire, filming everything with her phone like she's about to capture the moment of her ultimate victory. Her perfectly manicured nails tap against her phone case, and I can practically smell her expensive perfume mixing with the earthy scent of my vineyard. What would you do if your HOA tried to destroy your family business over a petty grudge? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet your HOA has tried something just as ridiculous. Let me tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Marcus Thornfield, and 3 years ago I was a corporate lawyer in San Francisco, billing clients $400 an hour and wearing suits that cost more than most people's rent. Then my marriage imploded. Turns out my ex-wife preferred my law partner over me. Divorce settlement cleaned me out faster than a casino slot machine. So there I was, broke and inheriting my grandfather's 40-acre Solstice Valley winery. The old man had been growing grapes here since 1962, back when this valley was honest farms and folks who minded their own business. Now, half the valley has been turned into McMansions for tech bros who think a vineyard is just expensive lawn decoration. I moved into the creaky old farmhouse where floorboards groan like arthritic joints, and my German Shepherd barrel treats every delivery truck like a personal invasion. But after years of corporate backstabbing, waking up to morning dew on grape leaves felt like actual therapy. The vineyard needed serious work, irrigation from the Carter administration, tractors older than disco, but this was my grandfather's legacy. Enter Delilah Hartwell. Picture Karen with a law degree and a god complex. She's the self-appointed queen of Solstice Heights, this cookie-cutter development that sprouted up 3 years ago like suburban cancer. Former city council member until voters got tired of her act. Now she channels all that political frustration into terrorizing HOA neighbors with the enthusiasm of a mall cop discovering a taser. Delilah's married to Preston Hartwell, local real estate developer and professional slimeball. He builds those beige suburban fortresses that all look AI-generated. She drives a white Escalade that's never seen dirt, hair perfectly shellacked even in windstorms. The trouble started when I replaced old fencing along my property line, basic maintenance to keep deer from eating grapes and drunk wedding guests from wandering into traffic. Standard 6-foot agricultural fencing. I'm out there Tuesday morning, post-hole digger in hand, sweat dripping into dusty earth, when I hear a car door slam like a gunshot. Delilah marches over in her white power suit and designer heels, clipboard in hand like she's conducting a federal inspection. "That fencing violates our HOA aesthetic guidelines," she announces. I lean on my shovel. "Ma'am, this property's been in my family 60 years. Your HOA got built 3 years ago." She huffs like I just declared the earth flat. "Rules are rules, honey. This is a residential neighborhood now. We have standards." That word, residential, dripped with condescension, like my family's farm was some zoning mistake needing correction. "We'll see about that," she says, clicking back to her Escalade. The door slam echoed across the valley. 2 days later, the real fun began. Certified letter arrives, thick, official, scary. Cease and desist, unauthorized agricultural structures. Claims my vineyard violates residential zoning, threatens $500 daily fines. But here's the kicker. She'd copied the county inspector, my bank, and the local newspaper. This wasn't just neighborly complaint. This was coordinated warfare. I sat in my kitchen that night, letters spread across the table, and something clicked. See, most people forget I spent 15 years as a corporate lawyer specializing in real estate law. I knew exactly what Delilah was trying to pull, and I knew she'd just made a massive tactical error. Agricultural properties have special protections most people never hear about. Grandfather's original deed likely included perpetual farming rights that supersede any HOA nonsense. But Delilah assumed I was just some dumb farmer who'd fold under legal pressure. Wrong assumption, lady. I called my old law school buddy Jake Morrison, environmental attorney who works pro bono for agricultural cases. "Marcus," he laughed when I explained the situation, Sounds like someone just poked a sleeping bear. Beryl trotted over and sat next to me, both of us staring at that threatening letter. Smart Dog started barking at every Escalade after that day. Turns out he had better judgment than most humans in this story. The smell of autumn grapes drifted through my kitchen window, sweet and promising. Delilah wanted a fight? She was about to learn why you never mess with a lawyer who's got nothing left to lose. Delilah wasn't messing around. Within a week, she'd filed a formal complaint with the county zoning department, claiming I was running an illegal commercial operation in a residential zone. She included photos of delivery trucks, tour groups, and wedding events, basically every legitimate business activity that keeps a vineyard breathing. The woman had done her homework, pulling strings with former city council connections to make it sound like I was running some kind of agricultural speakeasy threatening suburban civilization itself. But here's where Delilah made her first critical mistake. She assumed I was just another dumb farmer who'd fold under legal pressure. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 15 years as a corporate attorney, and my old mentor used to say, when someone tries to bury you in paperwork, you bury them back, but deeper. I spent that weekend diving into my grandfather's dusty filing cabinet, sneezing through decades of farm records. The musty smell of old paper mixed with my morning coffee as I pieced together our property's legal history. What I found in a manila folder marked "Important, Keep Forever" made me actually laugh out loud. My grandfather's original 1962 deed included an agricultural exemption with something called perpetual farming rights, legal language that essentially tells any future HOA to go pound sand. Back in law school, we'd studied cases where these old agricultural protections trumped million-dollar development schemes. I remember thinking then that most property owners had no idea these legal shields even existed. I drafted a response that would make my old law professors weep with pride. Certified letter with deed copies, exemption documentation, and a polite request for the county to confirm my bulletproof legal status. I sent copies to everyone on Delilah's distribution list, including the newspaper editor who probably thought he was getting gossip instead of a legal education. 2 days later, I'm checking irrigation lines when a county inspector shows up unannounced. Rodriguez seemed genuinely apologetic about the routine inspection he was required to conduct. "Between you and me," he said, adjusting his clipboard while grape leaves rustled in the afternoon breeze, "someone provided an anonymous tip about unpermitted buildings." Anonymous tip. Right. I could practically smell Delilah's Chanel perfume in that phrase. Rodriguez spent 3 hours examining every structure with forensic precision. My grandfather's 1965 barn? Properly grandfathered. The equipment shed? Built to code in 1998. Even the old root cellar passed with flying colors. "Everything's solid, Mr. Thornfield," Rodriguez said, his pen scratching across official forms. "Your agricultural exemption is ironclad. Whoever filed this complaint doesn't understand rural zoning law." That's when the light bulb went off. This wasn't about fence aesthetics. This was coordinated warfare. And Delilah had just revealed she was either incredibly stupid or incredibly desperate. Within a week, I got notice of an emergency HOA board meeting. The agenda mentioned community beautification standards, targeting agricultural eyesores impacting property values. Subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, I decided to crash this little circus. The Solstice Heights Community Center smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and middle-class anxiety. About 30 homeowners showed up, most looking like hostages at their own execution. Delilah commanded the front table, flanked by board members who nodded at everything she said like those bobblehead dogs people put in car windows. She'd prepared a whole PowerPoint about maintaining neighborhood character and protecting our investment, corporate buzzwords that made my lawyer's skin crawl. Then came her masterpiece, a petition she'd circulated collecting signatures about property value concerns from my commercial agricultural operation. The way she pronounced it, you'd think I was manufacturing crystal meth instead of growing grapes. But here's where Delilah's plan hit a snag bigger than a pothole on a country road. When she opened for discussion, 3 longtime Valley residents stood up to defend me. "Marcus's family has been here longer than any of us," declared Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher with the spine of a steel rod. "His vineyard is what makes this place special, not these cookie-cutter houses." I watched Delilah's perfectly composed mask crack like cheap makeup in summer heat. For one beautiful moment, Panic flashed across her face before she regained control and quickly tabled the discussion for further legal review. As the meeting dissolved, I spotted her whispering intensely with some suit-wearing stranger, expensive briefcase, the kind of guy who bills by the nanosecond. When she noticed me watching, their conversation ended faster than a teenage phone call when parents walk in. Walking to my truck, gravel crunching under my boots in the cool evening air, I realized this chess game was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Delilah had just revealed she had serious legal firepower backing her play. Beryl waited in the passenger seat, tail wagging like he knew something good was brewing. Smart Dog could sense when the real fight was about to begin. Delilah's next move came straight from the suburban warfare playbook. If you can't beat them legally, destroy them socially. Within days of that train wreck HOA meeting, she launched a character assassination campaign that would make a political hitman jealous. Enter Concerned Neighbors of Solstice Valley, Delilah's Facebook group where she positioned herself as a property value martyr fighting agricultural terrorism. She posted carefully angled photos making my tractor look like a rusty apocalypse machine and my perfectly normal vineyard equipment appear threatening enough to require SWAT intervention. The posts were masterful fiction wrapped in concerned citizen language. Does anyone else worry about all those delivery trucks speeding through our neighborhood? And has anyone noticed more flies since that commercial operation expanded? Pure lies, but they spread faster than rumors at a high school reunion. Then came the social shunning. Neighbors who'd waved for years suddenly developed selective blindness when they saw me coming. Bill from the hardware store, guy who used to chat about weather and baseball for 20 minutes, went colder than a Minnesota winter. Even my farmer's market booth faced stares that could freeze wine mid-pour. The real gut punch hit when I walked into First Valley Bank. Janet, the loan officer who'd handled my grandfather's accounts for 2 decades, suddenly needed additional documentation for routine equipment financing. Her smile felt faker than a Vegas wedding chapel, and she kept glancing at her computer screen like she was reading my credit obituary. But here's where being a former lawyer pays off. When someone's screwing you, you research exactly how they're doing it. I spent that evening digging into public records, and what I found made my wine turn to vinegar in my mouth. Preston Hartwell, Delilah's developer husband, owned way more Valley real estate than anyone realized. 3 completed developments, 2 in planning, and he'd been quietly buying agricultural land for 5 years like some kind of suburban land shark. The math was simple and ugly. Agricultural land sells for $8,000 per acre, but rezone it residential and boom, $50,000 per acre. My 40 acres represented a potential $2 million payday if they could pressure me into selling. I'd seen this exact scheme during my corporate days, where developers use HOAs as weapons to terrorize farmers who don't know their legal rights. I called Jake Morrison, my environmental lawyer buddy, whose gravelly voice crackled through the phone while I stared at moonlit grape rows. Marcus, you're dealing with a textbook land grab. These parasites prey on agricultural families who think they're powerless against suburban expansion. The next morning I hired a surveyor, something I should have done years ago, and ordered a comprehensive title search dating back to when this valley was nothing but cows and common sense. Meanwhile, Delilah doubled down on her social media jihad, posting articles about agricultural operations that supposedly caused health problems in other communities. Complete fiction. But fear travels faster than facts in suburban echo chambers, where people believe anything that validates their property value paranoia. 3 days later, my surveyor delivered news that made me literally laugh out loud in my kitchen. My property extended 50 feet further east than I'd known, straight through the backyards of 3 HOA houses. Turns out my grandfather had granted construction easements but retained ownership of the underlying land. Classic farming family move. Never sell the dirt, just rent the rights. Even better, buried in century-old records was a utility easement giving me legal access through the entire valley. Roads, power lines, water access, all legally protected paths that no HOA or development could ever block. The taste of impending victory was sweeter than my best Pinot Noir. But Delilah wasn't done embarrassing herself. She organized a community safety meeting claiming my vineyard attracted drunk drivers and created fire hazards. She brought petitions with signatures that looked suspiciously identical. Apparently half the neighborhood suffered from the same handwriting disorder. The meeting was pure comedy gold. Maybe 20 people showed up, mostly Delilah's disciples nodding like dashboard ornaments while she painted me as some agricultural terrorist. She demanded the city council review my business license and impose appropriate safety restrictions to protect innocent suburbanites from the menace of grape growing. That's when I realized something beautiful. Delilah was panicking. Her escalating tactics screamed desperation because her original plan was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The surveyor's findings had shifted the power balance, and somehow her real estate radar sensed it. I sat in the back of that pathetic meeting, listening to her increasingly unhinged allegations, while the smell of stale municipal coffee and middle-class anxiety filled the air. My German Shepherd Beryl had better strategic thinking than this woman. She reminded me of those small-town bullies who peak in high school and spend the rest of their lives trying to recapture that fleeting moment of power. Except now she was about to learn that cornering a lawyer with surveyor reports and nothing left to lose is like poking a grizzly bear with a toothpick. That bear was about to bite back, and it was going to hurt. Delilah's social media circus wasn't working fast enough, so she decided to bring out the nuclear option: expensive lawyers and legal intimidation. 2 weeks after her pathetic town hall performance, I got a thick envelope that felt heavier than a death sentence. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Hartwell, Morrison and Associates, no relation to my buddy Jake, demanding I immediately stop all business operations or face a lawsuit for creating a public nuisance. The letterhead was so fancy it probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery bill, and the legal language was designed to scare the average farmer into immediate surrender. They claimed my vineyard violated 12 different municipal codes, from noise ordinances to traffic violations to inappropriate commercial use in a residential zone. It was impressive fiction, like reading a novel where every single fact was completely wrong but written with such authority that you almost believed it. The letter gave me 72 hours to cease all commercial activities or face immediate legal action seeking damages, injunctive relief, and attorney's fees. Classic intimidation tactics: hit them fast, hit them hard, and hope they don't have the money or knowledge to fight back. Problem was, my divorce had cleaned out my legal defense fund faster than a slot machine in Vegas. I was looking at $400 per hour attorneys while living on a farmer's budget that considered Taco Bell fine dining. One prolonged legal battle could force bankruptcy and the exact land sale Delilah was hoping for. But here's what these suburban pirates didn't know. I hadn't just been practicing law for 15 years. I'd been specializing in exactly this kind of real estate warfare. During my corporate days, I'd seen developers use identical tactics to pressure out family farms from California to Connecticut. The playbook never changes because it usually works. That night, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 6 hours manually searching deed records by flashlight. Yes, flashlight, because apparently this county's record-keeping system hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. The musty smell of old documents mixed with the taste of gas station coffee as I dug through decades of property transfers and legal filings. What I found buried in a misfiled folder from 1987 made my hands shake with excitement. Solstice Valley had been designated a historic agricultural district under state preservation law, a designation that legally protects existing farms from development pressure and requires environmental impact studies for any new construction within 2 miles. This wasn't just some bureaucratic footnote. This was a legal nuclear weapon that could invalidate every development Preston Hartwell had built in the valley. I remembered studying similar cases in law school where heritage designations shut down billion-dollar development schemes overnight. But wait, it gets better. Cross-referencing Preston's development permits with the required environmental filings, I discovered something that made me actually punch the air in victory. He'd never filed for the mandatory impact studies. Every single house in Solstice Heights was potentially built without proper permits. We're talking about a $20 million real estate fraud scheme where buyers thought they were purchasing legitimate properties but might actually own expensive piles of unpermitted construction. The next morning brought a parade of harassment that would make a mafia protection racket jealous. Anonymous complaints to the health department about my wine production. Fire marshal safety inspection scheduled for my busiest wedding weekend. IRS audit notice that arrived with suspicious timing. Even my insurance company called threatening policy cancellation due to increased risk assessment. But the most beautiful part? Every single harassing action was now documenting a pattern of legal intimidation that would make any civil rights attorney salivate like a dog hearing a dinner bell. I spent that afternoon on the phone with Jake Morrison, whose laughter echoed through my kitchen as I explained what I'd discovered. "Marcus," he said between chuckles, You're not just dealing with harassment anymore. You're looking at federal charges, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. These idiots just handed you enough evidence to send them to prison. That evening, I sat on my porch with Beryl, watching the sunset paint my vineyard in golden light while sipping wine that tasted like victory. The smell of ripening grapes mixed with the evening breeze carried a promise of justice that was sweeter than any vintage I'd ever produced. Delilah and Preston thought they were playing chess with a simple farmer who'd fold under legal pressure. What they didn't realize was that they'd been playing checkers against a grandmaster who'd been documenting every illegal move they'd made. Tomorrow, I was going to start playing offense, and when a lawyer with nothing to lose decides to fight back using the exact same legal system that created him, well, let's just say the results tend to be spectacular. The taste of impending justice was better than any wine I'd ever made. The next morning, I was back at the courthouse by sunrise, armed with coffee that could strip paint and a determination that scared even me. That's when Ethel Martinez, the courthouse clerk who'd been filing documents since the Nixon administration, changed everything. "You know, honey," she said, her arthritic fingers shuffling through a stack of misfiled papers, "I've been watching you dig through those records for weeks. What exactly are you hunting for?" I explained about the Heritage District designation, and Ethel's weathered face lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, that old thing. I remember when they filed it. Caused quite a stir with the developers back then, too." She disappeared into the maze of filing cabinets and returned 20 minutes later with a folder that looked like it had survived a war. Found it in the wrong drawer. Been there since 1987. Some clerk probably misfiled it decades ago. What was inside that folder didn't just change my case, it blew it wide open like a safe full of dynamite. The 1987 Historic Agricultural District designation wasn't just some feel-good paperwork. It included specific environmental protections that required any development within 2 miles of heritage vineyards to undergo state environmental impact studies, not suggestions. Legal requirements with teeth sharper than a lawyer's billing practices. But here's the kicker that made me literally whistle in that dusty courthouse. Preston Hartwell knew about this designation. Had to. His lawyers would have found it during due diligence for any major development, which meant every house he'd built in Solstice Heights was constructed with full knowledge that he was violating state environmental law. We weren't talking about sloppy paperwork or bureaucratic oversight. This was deliberate, systematic fraud on a scale that would make Bernie Madoff jealous. I cross-referenced Preston's development permits with state environmental filings, and the results were beautiful in their criminality. 0 environmental impact studies. 0 compliance with heritage protection requirements. 0 legal authority to build those suburban monuments to his greed. Every single property sale in Solstice Heights was based on fraudulent permits. Buyers thought they were purchasing legitimate homes, but actually owned expensive piles of illegally constructed real estate that could be condemned by the state at any moment. The scope hit me like a freight train full of justice. Preston hadn't just been harassing one farmer. He'd been defrauding hundreds of families who'd invested their life savings in properties that might legally not exist. "Sweet mother of pearl," I whispered, sitting in that courthouse basement surrounded by the musty smell of legal history and the metallic taste of pure vindication. Ethel peered over my shoulder at the documents spread across the table. "That bad, huh?" "Ethel," I said, gathering the papers like they were made of gold, "this isn't bad. This is beautiful. This is $20 million in real estate fraud with a paper trail longer than Interstate 95. Suddenly, everything made sense. Delilah's desperate harassment campaign, Preston's willingness to hire expensive lawyers for what should have been a simple neighbor dispute, the coordinated attacks on my business and reputation. They weren't trying to force me out because of property values or aesthetic concerns. They were terrified that someone would discover their entire development empire was built on a foundation of lies, forged permits, and environmental law violations. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the key witness who could bring down a criminal enterprise that had been operating in plain sight for years. Walking out of that courthouse, legal documents tucked under my arm like treasure maps, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my divorce. Pure, unadulterated power. The hunters had just become the hunted, and they had no idea the trap was already closing around them. You know what they say about the best revenge being served cold? Well, mine was about to be served with a side of federal charges and a garnish of criminal prosecution. Time to assemble my dream team of suburban justice warriors. First call went to Jake Morrison, my environmental lawyer buddy who'd been itching for a case like this since law school. "Marcus," he said, his voice crackling with excitement through my kitchen phone, "what you're describing isn't just harassment. It's a RICO case waiting to happen. We're talking organized criminal enterprise here." Jake agreed to work pro bono in exchange for the publicity this case would generate. Nothing makes an environmental attorney happier than taking down developers who think environmental laws are optional suggestions. Next, I needed someone who understood the technical side of agricultural preservation. Enter Dr. Sarah Bennett, soil scientist at the State University and expert witness in heritage protection cases. When I explained what I'd found, she practically jumped through the phone. "Mr. Thornfield," she said during our first meeting, sitting in my kitchen while Beryl investigated her briefcase for treats, "what Preston Hartwell did violates about 6 different environmental protection statutes. The soil and water impact studies alone would have shut down his projects before ground was broken." Then came my secret weapon, Father Miguel Santos, community organizer who'd been fighting gentrification in the valley for a decade. Miguel represented the immigrant farm workers who'd been quietly displaced by suburban expansion, and he had connections throughout the agricultural community that money couldn't buy. "Brother," Miguel said, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug in my vineyard at sunrise, "we've been waiting for someone with your legal knowledge to stand up to these land grabbers. You're not fighting this alone." Our strategy was beautiful in its simplicity. Jake would file emergency injunctions against further development while preparing federal whistleblower complaints. Dr. Bennett would document every environmental violation with scientific precision that would make a forensics team jealous. Miguel would organize community support and gather witness statements from affected farming families. And me? I'd use every dirty legal trick I'd learned in 15 years of corporate warfare to make Preston and Delilah's lives more complicated than a tax audit during an IRS investigation. The evidence-gathering phase felt like preparing for D-Day. Security cameras went up around my property, partially for protection, but mostly to document any further harassment attempts. Every interaction with Delilah or Preston would now be recorded, creating an evidence trail that would make prosecutors salivate. Jake discovered something beautiful while investigating HOA finances, suspicious contractor payments to companies that existed only on paper. Classic money laundering through fake construction contracts. "Marcus," he said, spreadsheets covering my dining room table like battle plans. "They've been using HOA funds to pay for legal harassment. That's embezzlement, fraud, and probably tax evasion." Dr. Bennett's environmental impact analysis read like an indictment against suburban sprawl itself. Groundwater contamination from inadequate septic systems, soil erosion from improper grading, disruption of wildlife corridors that had existed for centuries. "What they did here," she explained, pointing to satellite photos showing environmental destruction, "would require 10 years of remediation to fix properly." But the most satisfying discovery came from Miguel's community outreach. Preston hadn't just targeted me, he'd systematically pressured 4 other agricultural families over the past 5 years. 2 had already sold under duress, not knowing their legal rights. Classic predatory behavior that established a clear pattern for federal prosecutors. We created an informal Valley Farmers Alliance that met weekly in my barn, the smell of hay and determination mixing with the taste of homemade coffee and righteous anger. These weren't just farmers. They were families with deep roots and long memories who'd watched their community get bulldozed by suburban greed. The preparation details felt like organizing a military campaign. Jake filed preliminary motions for emergency injunctions. Dr. Bennett prepared soil samples and water table analyses that looked more detailed than NASA mission reports. Miguel coordinated witness statements and media outreach through agricultural advocacy groups. And I was having the time of my life. Turns out I'd actually missed the intellectual challenge of complex legal strategy. My old lawyer instincts were returning stronger than ever, sharpened by personal investment and powered by pure, righteous fury. The funniest part was watching Ethel become our informal intelligence source. She'd call whenever Preston or Delilah visited the courthouse, reporting their activities like some kind of legal spy network. "Honey," she'd whisper through the phone, "that developer husband of hers just requested property records for 3 more farms. Y'all better warn them." Even Father Miguel's Sunday sermons started including subtle references to false prophets who build their kingdoms on foundations of lies and stolen land. The man had a gift for making environmental law sound biblical. Sitting in my vineyard that evening, surrounded by legal documents and evidence folders, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the pure satisfaction of using my skills for something that actually mattered. Beryl lounged next to me, both of us watching the sunset paint the valley in colors that no development could ever replicate. Tomorrow, we'd start the counterattack that would change everything. Delilah's next move proved that cornered animals are the most dangerous. Within days of my legal team assembly, the harassment escalated from annoying to criminal faster than a drunk driver hitting a tree. It started with vandalism that would make teenage delinquents proud. I woke up Tuesday morning to find my irrigation line sliced clean through, thousands of gallons of water flooding my best Pinot Noir section. The cuts were too precise for accident. Someone had used bolt cutters with surgical precision to cause maximum damage during peak growing season. But Delilah was just getting warmed up. Anonymous phone calls started hitting my wedding clients. Mysterious voices claiming my vineyard was unsafe for events due to recent chemical contamination. Pure fiction, but 3 couples canceled their bookings, costing me nearly $15,000 in lost revenue. Then came the online character assassination. Fake reviews appeared on every platform from Yelp to Google, claiming my wine tasted like vinegar and my events were disasters. Food poisoning at the reception, read one 5-star work of fiction. Bride's family sued for emotional distress, claimed another. The creativity was almost impressive if it wasn't destroying my business. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was working legal magic behind the scenes. He'd obtained a temporary restraining order against any further harassment of agricultural operations by HOA representatives or their agents. The injunction was beautiful. 18 pages of legal language that essentially told Delilah to shut up or face contempt of court charges. Dr. Bennett's environmental report was a masterpiece of scientific destruction. Her analysis proved that Preston's developments had contaminated the water table, disrupted wildlife migration patterns, and violated soil conservation requirements dating back to the New Deal. Mr. Thornfield, she said, spreading soil samples across my kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial. What they did here constitutes environmental vandalism on an industrial scale. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 HOA board members who quietly resigned citing ethical concerns about Delilah's leadership. Turns out not everyone in Solstice Heights was comfortable with criminal harassment campaigns against their neighbors. That's when I discovered the beautiful truth about Preston's financial situation. A little digging into public records revealed he owed over $2 million in construction loans, with the bank threatening foreclosure if development permits weren't secured within 90 days. No wonder they were getting desperate. They were leveraged up to their eyeballs in a scheme that was about to collapse. Delilah had mortgaged her house to invest in Preston's projects. These weren't just greedy developers, they were financially desperate criminals facing bankruptcy if their fraud scheme got exposed. The intimidation tactics escalated to outright thuggery. Dead fish appeared at my vineyard entrance, stinking like a crime scene in summer heat. Anonymous threatening letters arrived daily, promising everything from property destruction to personal harm. False police reports claimed I'd threatened neighbors, bringing squad cars to my property for wellness checks that disrupted harvest operations. But every incident was now being documented by security cameras and reported to the FBI. Jake had contacted federal prosecutors about interstate commerce fraud, and they were building a case that would make Al Capone's tax evasion look like a parking ticket. The community was splitting like a rotten log. Half the valley farmers publicly supported my fight against development pressure. Local newspapers began investigating the unusual pattern of agricultural harassment in Solstice Valley. Even the regional TV news expressed interest in a story about heritage farms versus suburban expansion. Preston's real estate sales stalled completely. Who wants to buy a house when federal investigators are asking questions about permit fraud? His construction crews abandoned job sites like they were radioactive, and suppliers started demanding cash payments instead of credit terms. My favorite moment came when Delilah tried to organize another community meeting, and only 6 people showed up. Even her most loyal supporters were backing away from the crazy train before it crashed into federal prison. The smell of fear was stronger than my morning coffee. Every time I saw Delilah around town, she looked more unhinged. Hair less perfect, makeup applied like war paint, eyes darting around like a hunted animal. The woman was cracking under pressure faster than cheap pavement in a heat wave. But my absolute favorite part of this whole circus? Preston tried offering me $3 million cash for immediate property sale, claiming it was a generous settlement to avoid lengthy legal proceedings. The desperation was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I told him where he could stick his settlement offer, and it wasn't in a bank account. That evening, sitting on my porch with Beryl, while the smell of ripening grapes mixed with the metallic taste of approaching storm clouds, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just fighting for my vineyard anymore. I was fighting for every family farm that had been bullied by suburban development, every agricultural community that had been told to surrender to progress. Tomorrow, we were going to spring the trap that would end this war once and for all, and it was going to be spectacular. Preston's desperation reached new heights when he showed up at my vineyard on a foggy Thursday morning, briefcase in hand and panic written across his face like a confession letter. The man looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, which, considering federal investigators were breathing down his neck, probably wasn't far from the truth. "Marcus," he said, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of a used car salesman at gunpoint, "I've got a proposition that'll solve both our problems." The offer was beautiful in its desperation. $4 million cash for immediate property sale with closing within 48 hours. He called it a generous settlement to avoid lengthy legal battles that would hurt both our families. The subtext was clearer than mountain spring water. He was drowning financially and needed my land to legitimize his fraud scheme before federal prosecutors finished building their case. "This offer expires in 48 hours, he said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "After that, things get complicated for everyone involved." I let him sweat for exactly 30 seconds before responding. "Preston, I wouldn't sell you this land if you offered me $10 million and threw in your firstborn child." His mask slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, farm boy. We have resources you can't imagine." What he didn't know was that I'd been wearing a wire for the past month, courtesy of FBI agent Rodriguez, same guy who'd inspected my property months ago, but actually a federal investigator building a massive fraud case. Every threat, every bribe attempt, every admission of guilt was being recorded for posterity and prosecution. Meanwhile, Delilah's social media campaign reached new levels of unhinged creativity. She posted fake stories about my supposed tax problems, claiming the IRS was about to seize my vineyard for back payments. She spread rumors about my divorce, invented financial scandals, and even suggested my wine contained dangerous chemicals that threatened public health. The woman had gone full conspiracy theory, posting 20 times a day about the agricultural menace threatening property values. Her followers were abandoning the crazy train faster than passengers on the Titanic, and even her closest allies started quietly unfriending her online. But I had my own nuclear weapon waiting in the wings. The state attorney general had opened a formal investigation into Preston's development practices, and the FBI had interviewed me as their star witness in a major white-collar crime case. Federal charges were coming: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, environmental law violations, and my personal favorite, racketeering under RICO statutes. The community fractures were spreading like cracks in a dam. Half the HOA revolted against Delilah's leadership, circulating petitions to remove her from the board. Preston's construction crews walked off job sites when paychecks started bouncing. The local bank froze all development loan payments pending resolution of legal irregularities. Most satisfying was watching Delilah's public breakdown. She started having screaming matches with neighbors in grocery store parking lots. Her behavior at town council meetings became so erratic that the mayor had to gavel her into silence. Her social media rants devolved into incoherent rambling about outside agitators and conspiracies against hardworking families. The woman was cracking like cheap pottery in an earthquake. Jake Morrison delivered the final strategic masterstroke. He arranged a community mediation meeting at the town hall, supposedly to resolve our dispute amicably. What Delilah and Preston didn't know was that local TV news would be there, state investigators would attend as neutral observers, and my entire legal team was ready to present evidence that would make their fraud scheme headline news. "Marcus," Jake said during our final strategy session, legal documents spread across my dining room table like battle plans, "this is going to be beautiful. They think they're walking into mediation, but they're actually walking into their own public execution." Dr. Bennett had prepared environmental impact visuals that looked like evidence from a crime scene. Miguel organized a dozen farming families ready to testify about Preston's systematic harassment campaign. Even Ethel from the courthouse volunteered to attend with her decades of institutional memory about property fraud schemes. The trap was set with the precision of a Swiss watch and the subtlety of a freight train. That evening, I walked through my vineyard one last time before the confrontation. Beryl trotting beside me through rows of grapes that had survived 3 generations of family stewardship. The smell of ripening fruit mixed with evening mist carried promises of justice sweeter than any vintage I'd ever produced. Tomorrow, Delilah and Preston would learn that you don't corner a lawyer with nothing to lose and expect to walk away unscathed. Tomorrow, years of harassment, fraud, and criminal intimidation would come crashing down on their heads like a landslide of legal consequences. Tomorrow, the hunters would finally become the hunted, and the whole valley would witness what happens when greed meets justice in open court. I could almost taste the victory already. The town hall was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car, with standing room only and tension so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. Word had spread through the valley faster than wildfire. Everyone knew this wasn't just mediation. This was the showdown that would determine the future of Solstice Valley. Delilah arrived early, commanding the front row like a general preparing for battle. She wore her most expensive power suit and brought a briefcase full of what I assumed were more fake documents and manufactured evidence. Her perfectly coiffed hair practically radiated confidence, and she smiled at supporters like she was accepting an award for suburban excellence. Preston rolled in with 2 lawyers whose briefcases probably cost more than most people's cars. The legal firepower was impressive, until you realized they were preparing to defend the indefensible with evidence that would make a conspiracy theorist blush. Local TV news had set up cameras in the back, their equipment humming with electronic anticipation. Channel 7's investigative reporter Sarah Kim had been following the story for weeks, smelling the kind of corruption scandal that wins journalism awards and destroys political careers. When mediator Judge Patricia Wells called the meeting to order, the auditorium fell silent except for the scratching of pens and the soft whir of recording equipment. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with industrial carpet cleaner and municipal coffee created an atmosphere of impending doom. Delilah opened with her greatest hits collection, a performance worthy of Broadway if Broadway specialized in delusional suburban theater. She demanded I apologize to the entire community for disrupting neighborhood harmony with illegal agricultural operations. She presented her petition signed by concerned neighbors, claiming my vineyard threatened property values and public safety. "Ladies and gentlemen," she proclaimed, gesturing like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, "we cannot allow one person's selfish commercial interests to destroy what we've built here. Rules exist for a reason, and Mr. Thornfield thinks he's above the law." The irony was so thick you could serve it with crackers. Preston followed with his own theatrical masterpiece, offering to mediate this unfortunate situation by purchasing my property for fair market value. He positioned himself as the generous peacemaker trying to resolve a conflict that threatened everyone's investments. "I'm prepared to offer Mr. Thornfield a settlement that reflects his property's true agricultural value," he said, his voice carrying the false sincerity of a politician promising tax cuts. Sometimes compromise serves the greater good. Then came my turn. I stood slowly, pulling out a folder thick enough to choke a horse, and thanked the community for their patience during what I called an educational process that's taught us all valuable lessons about property law and criminal justice. The audience leaned forward like spectators at a gladiator match. "I'd like to share some interesting information I've discovered about our valley's legal history," I said, my voice carrying the calm confidence of a lawyer who holds all the winning cards. Starting with the 1889 original land grant that established perpetual agricultural rights, continuing through the 1987 state heritage designation that protects existing farms from development pressure. I pulled out survey documents showing HOA houses built on my easement land, financial records proving Preston's systematic fraud, environmental reports documenting illegal construction without required impact studies, FBI evidence of interstate wire fraud totaling over $20 million. The audience murmur grew louder with each revelation. "But here's the most interesting discovery," I continued, savoring every word like fine wine. "The state attorney general has been investigating Mr. Hartwell's development practices for 6 months. Federal prosecutors have built a case for wire fraud, mail fraud, environmental law violations, and racketeering under RICO statutes." Preston's face went white as courthouse marble. Delilah's confident smile cracked like cheap makeup in summer heat. "In fact," I said, glancing toward the back of the auditorium, "I believe federal agents are here tonight to serve warrants based on evidence gathered during this investigation." That's when FBI agent Rodriguez and 2 federal marshals walked through the main doors, badges visible and handcuffs ready. The auditorium erupted in whispers that sounded like a beehive under attack. Delilah's composure shattered completely. "This is a setup," she screamed, pointing at me like I was personally responsible for gravity. "He's lying. Marcus Thornfield is a fraud and a liar." But the beautiful part, the absolutely gorgeous part, was watching her realize that everyone in that auditorium could see the federal agents approaching with official paperwork. "Oh, and Mrs. Hartwell," I said, delivering the line I'd been practicing for weeks. "Those police you called to my vineyard 6 months ago, they're here tonight to arrest your husband for federal crimes." The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the silent auditorium like gunshots. Preston's lawyers started talking about constitutional rights while Delilah sobbed loud enough to wake the dead. Camera flashes lit up the room like a lightning storm, capturing every moment of justice being served with a side of public humiliation. The taste of victory was sweeter than any wine I'd ever made. 6 months later, watching Preston Hartwell get sentenced to 3 years in federal prison was sweeter than Christmas morning. The judge had been particularly brutal during sentencing, calling his scheme a systematic exploitation of agricultural families that represents the worst of American greed. Delilah got 6 months in minimum security and lost everything: house, reputation, and that god-awful white Escalade. Last I heard, she was working at a strip mall insurance office 3 counties away, keeping a profile lower than a snake's belly. Amazing how federal conviction cures suburban princess syndrome. But the real victory was community transformation that proved justice actually exists when good people fight back together. Solstice Valley received official Protected Agricultural Heritage District status with legal protections stronger than Fort Knox. No more suburban cancer. No more McMansion invasions. Just farms, families, and neighbors who give a damn about each other. The Solstice Valley Heritage Foundation I established with settlement money became everything I'd dreamed: scholarships for agricultural students, educational farm tours, and community gardens where kids learn food doesn't magically appear in supermarkets. We're teaching the next generation that land has value beyond property speculation. Personal healing surprised me most. Turns out defeating criminal developers does wonders for divorce trauma. My partnership with Dr. Sarah Bennett evolved from legal collaboration to something much deeper. She moved into the farmhouse, bringing scientific expertise and the kind of love that makes everything better. Beryl got a companion, rescue dog named Justice with an even better nose for trouble. Both patrol the vineyard like furry security guards, and I swear they can smell HOA corruption from miles away. The business revival exceeded wildest expectations. Media coverage turned Justice Valley wine into the best-selling label in 3 counties. Wedding bookings stretched 2 years out, and I've become the poster child for agricultural preservation nationwide. Sometimes the best revenge is massive success. Preston's illegal developments, condemned and demolished by state order. Those environmental law-violating McMansions became public parkland protecting wildlife corridors and water resources. Watching bulldozers tear down symbols of suburban greed felt like therapeutic destruction. The HOA dissolved completely when homeowners realized their properties might be legally worthless, and their board president was a convicted felon. Poetic justice at its finest. My favorite ongoing victory is the weekly Valley Farmers Alliance meetings in my barn. Legal strategy sessions became a support network for agricultural families throughout the region. We share resources, coordinate marketing, and ensure no developer terrorizes farmers who don't know their rights. Father Miguel's community organizing expanded into a regional movement protecting agricultural communities. His Sunday sermons about defending God's green earth from suburban locusts packed churches across 3 counties. Even Ethel became a local celebrity after her courthouse testimony helped convict Preston. Her institutional memory made her star witness in multiple fraud cases, and she's writing a book called Filing Cabinets and Felons, a courthouse clerk's guide to developer fraud. The annual Harvest Festival now draws thousands for wine tasting, farm tours, and authentic agricultural experiences no suburban development could replicate. The smell of barbecue mingles with children's laughter in community gardens, creating atmospheres sweeter than any vintage. Last month, I got calls from farmers in Oregon, Texas, and Vermont facing similar developer harassment. My story inspired agricultural families nationwide to research legal rights and fight back against land grab schemes. The movement spreads like wildfire through dry grass. But here's the beautiful part. I recently discovered Preston wasn't working alone. There's an entire network of developers using identical tactics across agricultural regions nationwide. Guess who's helping federal investigators build cases against the whole criminal enterprise? Standing in my vineyard at sunset, watching Beryl and Justice chase fireflies through grape rows while Sarah tends soil samples and golden light paints the preserved valley, I realize something profound. The best revenge isn't just refusing to be their victim. It's becoming the nightmare they never saw coming. Remember, folks, knowledge is power, but shared knowledge is revolution. These bullies count on you not knowing your rights, not understanding the law, not fighting back. They're wrong. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else fighting similar battles. And smash that subscribe button for HOA Stories, where we expose suburban tyrants and celebrate the heroes who defeat them. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. When good people fight back with facts, law, and community support, the bullies always lose. And that victory tastes better than the finest wine ever made.